My guest today is Adam B. Coleman, author, host of the Breaking Bread podcast, and writer for the New York Post, Unherd, and others. We discuss the current political climate in America, the many intersections between race and politics, and what it means to live outside of the social boundaries and categories that seek to restrict our experiences as human beings. Adam is the definition of a free thinker, and our conversation covers a wide landscape of ideas. Stay tuned. Adam Coleman, thanks for talking to me today, man.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, well, I've been a reader of yours. I've been a silent lurker in a X group that we're both part of. I don't post or say anything, but I have been reading your stuff, man, and I really appreciate your perspective on just about everything. I wanted to start today. Oh, of course. Yeah. I wanted to start today by talking about your revised edition of your book, Black Victim to Black Victor. Can you talk about the book itself and what you cover and just the reason for the revision?
Sure. So the book itself is using race as kind of like the superficial layer to talk about something deeper, which is about family. So it does talk about culture. There are some things that are race specific, talking about, aspects of Black culture that I'm critiquing. But at the core of it, there are things that are very universal. And I go back and forth. So I might talk about Black children, and then I might just say children in general, right? Because it doesn't matter if they're Black or not. And at the end, what I try to do is I have I have some solution chapters. I forgot how many in total, but I have solution chapters because I didn't want a book just complaining. I wanted to have some sort of like solutions thing, mindset things that I think we should try to advocate for. And ultimately, the message is that we have more in common than we do different, and that there are issues that we can kind of come together on, and that we all are facing. That's a bigger challenge. And I would say like the number one thing that I try to express in the book is the importance of family and how it impacts children. So the book has a lot of storytelling. Mostly it's, personal stories, whether it's lessons, whether it's talking specifically about my childhood. And then I do like a couple of fictional storytelling, but just to paint a picture. And that was like the first time I ever really tried doing something like that. So for people to understand, I don't have a writing background. I decided to write the book in 2020, a few months after the death of George Floyd. Maybe it was like 2 months after. But it came out of feeling like I wasn't allowed to ask questions or have critique about things. And then I sought out like free speech platforms to kind of express how I was feeling, but mainly to figure out like, first, am I crazy? Like, am I the only one who's thinking this? And then by me writing it out in a long form fashion and detailed, I got a lot of people who said, you should really write, like you should write more often. And that was what kind of pushed me into the direction of, you know what, maybe I should write the book that I always wanted to write. I always wanted to leave something behind for my son. And I had an idea of writing a book, but I had no idea what to write. And that was kind of it. And from there, it took me about 9 months to do something I've never done before, which is write a book. And I did the best I knew how to do. And I think about 3 months in, I knew exactly how I wanted the book to turn out, and that's how it turned out.
That's awesome, man. I've been writing for, like I said, over 20 years, and I've never made even the slightest attempt at a book. I have a hard time. I'm an essayist. I have a hard time getting through like 3 pages of a Google Doc. I get like 2.5 down and I'm like, I got to add some more paragraphs here. This ain't worth it yet. And, I bang my head against the wall trying to think about what to say next. So that's a huge accomplishment, man. And
Thank you.
I want to ask, what about the George Floyd his death motivated you to write the book, inspired it?
So actually, what's interesting is it was less about his death, but more about the reaction to his death.
Right.
And that's kind of like, that's been like my writing MO, is that it's less about what had happened. It's more about the reaction to what's happened that I find fascinating, because that's how you see how people work, and why people respond the way they do, and the narratives that come from it. So if for me, it was like, okay, it's unfortunate that this man died, um, and and I get we want to have some sort of conversation, but why does it feel like it's not a conversation? It's a demand. Why
Mm.
does it feel like it's commanded upon us to all of a sudden take this stance that everything is wrong? Even if I agree that Derek Chauvin did this and he's a white supremacist and all this stuff, but I'm supposed to make the next leap to say that every police officer is Derek Chauvin. I can never get anything fair, any sort of fair treatment in America. That every white person is just waiting to be a Klansman if you just give them an opportunity. Like, but that's not my reality. That's never been my reality. Have I dealt with racist white people? Sure, a few times, a handful of times in my life, but they didn't alter my life. The vast majority of people that I met who didn't look like me have been cordial, have been fine. Some of my best friends, some people who looked out for me and they didn't have to look out for me, who actually genuinely cared about me.
Mm.
Um, so, and I felt the same way for Black people. I have Black friends. I have Black people who were shit and some who were great, right? Because they're people, right? And that's ultimately like the message I try to get across often, is that we are just people, and there's no there's no race specific trauma, right? We all have some sort of trauma. We all have some sort of issue that we're dealing with. Maybe some groups more than others, maybe it's slightly different, but like we all have a trauma. Like we all have some sort of issue that we have to deal with. Trauma is a strong word, but we all have like some sort of problem, right? You pick your issue. um, but I just wanted to kind of answer your question. The George Floyd situation made it so that me as a private citizen, so to speak, I'm not a public figure at that point, and I really didn't even use social media. I didn't really care for it. Um, Someone who's a private citizen in private, you know, at my core, who kept his personal views and political views private as well. That was a choice. It was a choice for me not to say anything, but it felt like I wasn't allowed to say something.
Mm.
And that's different. And that's kind of like what made me want to say something, because the message was, you're not allowed to say these things. And then we had all these people who were enforcing this new edict that you're not allowed to question things. You're not allowed to say these things, especially with COVID happening. Why 6 feet? Right. And I remember getting into an argument with a now former friend, asking, I've been alive for 30 plus years at that point. Like, I've never heard of 6 feet. Never. There's been viruses forever. I've never heard of, if you get sick, you should stand 6 feet away from somebody at least. Where did that come from? And having to deal with, you're ignorant. How dare you? How dare you ask this question, a logical question about something I've never heard of before? And it's that 2020 felt like the age of um, the age of curiosity being an illegal process,
Mm.
right? Just, it's an illegal thought process. How dare you, I don't know, be curious about some sort of policy that's being put into place that you've never heard of before, that's based off of something you've never heard of before. So I don't know. I think the lack of curiosity, and the enforcement to have no curiosity, just comply, 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 um, push me to do something that I never sought out to do.
Interesting. Yeah, and I mean it's yeah, the thing that I watched happen with the George Floyd reaction, and just the way people were made to behave in general. It was expected of you, depending on the shade of your skin, to toe a certain line. Right now, if you were
Right.
white, it was okay to filter over to the left side of it. But if you were anything other, to hold any to question anything in that entire
Hmm.
scenario, how it played out, what were the factors involved, automatically it kind of puts you on the side of the enemy, right?
Right.
You're automatically viewed as an enemy, and I think it's an ideological trick, right?
Right.
It's trying to keep you subservient to the ideology overall, and that's really what it's about. And you have this fantastic podcast series that you do called Breaking Bread. I absolutely love it. I wish I would have thought of the idea first, because having a good conversation over a meal, that's awesome. And you had Isaiah Carter on your second to last episode, and he talked about the racism that exists on the left within Democrats. And I'll admit I'm from the left, right? I abandoned the left because the left became something that I didn't recognize anymore.
Same.
Do you want to talk about that a little bit? Because for me, I'm still trying to figure out where I am and what I am anymore, because I'm nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, I would say right now I am politically homeless.
Yeah, me too.
But I don't mind having no shelter.
Yeah.
I was never a leftist. I was always what I would self-proclaim as a liberal. And I would say, politically speaking, I was a default Democrat. And part of the reason I was a default Democrat is because of my surrounding. When I got into politics, the people who got me into politics were Democrats. So my entire perspective on politics started off from the left. And then when I wanted to know more, I thought I was getting unbiased information from, the mainstream media. This is just the truth and what's happening. But I didn't fully comprehend how biased it was, how narratives work, how they have a lean, how they leave out information, all these different things. So over a period of time, I just started becoming curious, because everything outside of politics, I'm always curious about. When the topic of race, I've always felt this way. I've never felt any different. So that wasn't a progression for me. But politics was an area where I lacked curiosity, and that was a weakness of mine. And when I stopped adhering to just whatever they're saying and started being curious, then my life changed, because I started actually thinking for myself for once. So, I wrote an article talking about how I met a guy in Madrid when I was traveling, and just by chance, I met him in a pub, and he's a British conservative. I didn't know this at the time. He was just a guy who was into football, and we kept in contact, and we were at in the very beginning, we were talking like every week, actually like every other day. We were having banter back and forth. And then one day he told me he was for Brexit, for them separating from the EU. Mm-hmm. And I asked him why, because the media outlets have been telling me that it's only for these racist white British people who don't like foreigners and blah, 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 blah. And he told me, I want to say verbatim, that the United States would never allow an outside governing body to tell it what to do. And I said, that makes sense, right? So this man I just happened to meet in a pub had more clarity as to why people actually want Brexit, and explained it to me in a way that me as an American can understand, than these corporate media outlets who get paid to do this. And it's because they had a particular agenda, and they wanted to erase a common sense voice like his. Does that mean that there's not some backwards British person who hates foreigners who wants Brexit? Sure, fine. Those people might exist, but that's not the entirety of the movement, and why they wanted it. There are lots of logical reasons why they wanted a separation from the EU. So that was like one of those areas. And actually, as an individual, he's one of those people who opened up my eyes to a lot of stuff. We started going down kind of like the audiobook rabbit hole, and he would listen to something, I would listen to something, and we'd share, what we thought. I started listening to libertarians, started listening to different political philosophies. I stopped listening to mainstream media and just started going straight to the source. A lot of people don't know this, but I, a lot of people are like, I'm done with the left, I'm going to the right. But I actually, when I said I'm done listening to the mainstream media, I'm actually going to listen to progressives first because I'm on the left, right? Let me
Mm-hmm.
hear what progressives have to say. And for months, I listened to nothing but progressive stuff. So I know exactly how they think. I know why they think this way. I know what they advocate for, right? So I'm very familiar with progressives one. Okay, now let me hear what conservatives have to say. And then I started listening to conservative media. And so I was just for quite some time, and this was before the pandemic. I want to say like 2018 into 2019, I was just bouncing around from political philosophy to another, all doing it by myself.
Yeah.
Didn't talk to anybody except for this guy about it and maybe one other person, but it was from my own gratification. And it just turns out to be extremely beneficial for the line of work that I'm doing now because I have a full understanding as to the type of people that I'm in strong disagreement over. So to summarize, it's not that I was completely wrong about the right when I was on the left, but I wasn't completely right about the right when I was on the left,
Yeah.
right? So there's that nuance, right? There are things that the right is absolutely correct about. Um, do they have terrible approaches to things? Absolutely. Right. And there are some things that are wrong on the left that the right is correct about, but it doesn't mean that the left is always wrong,
Yeah.
right? The substance of what they're complaining about might be correct. Their solution might be wrong, right? So there's some sort of nuance that's in between, and I just wanted to find what made sense to me. But I'll say this: the final push, which said my push was to leave the Democrats, was what happened during the 2020 primaries
Mm.
when they artificially pushed Joe Biden as a front runner. And I was watching the primaries as they were going, and he sucked. He sucked,
Right.
absolutely sucked. And I'm watching the Democrats put up these billionaires after billionaires who just flood the political market. What's his name? Bloomberg all of a sudden comes in, throws millions upon millions of dollars. I remember listening to a Spanish radio station, Bloomberg. I'm just like, he paid everybody. And I'm just like, the Democrats is this like the party of the elite.
Yeah.
They had at one point, I believe, 3 billionaires who were running for president at
Yeah.
one point. I was like, and no one sees anything a little bit wrong with this? Just a little bit? I don't
Yeah.
know. So, but when they artificially pushed Joe Biden up front after he won, I want to say it was North Carolina. He won North Carolina, and that was the first primary that he won. All of a sudden, everybody dropped out except for, I want to say 3 people. I
Mm.
think it was Buttigieg, Elizabeth Warren, and I think it was one other person. And then Bernie Sanders was still in. They stayed in long enough for Bernie Sanders to not get enough delegates.
Yeah.
And then they dropped out.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, this thing is a complete fucking sham. And I
Yeah.
want nothing to do with the Democrats. So that was like the final straw. There was a whole bunch of things that happened up into there that I really that I really didn't like. But that was the final straw. I said, I'm done with the Democrats.
Yeah.
At least for the meantime. Unless I see some radical change, I'm absolutely done. I saw how they were catering to the progressive left, especially after the primaries. And I was like, what is this? They started saying some weird shit I've never heard before, especially after George Floyd with the Kente Claus and all this. They just went mega, mega fucking weird. And I had never seen that before. I had been paying attention to Democrat politics for over a decade at that point. I had
Yeah.
never seen the stuff that I saw before. And I was like, this is not the Democratic Party that I first liked, right? Now they're something different.
Yeah.
They're illiberal, right? They're not liberal. This is not a liberal party anymore. I am still relatively liberal. And so I couldn't associate with the Democrats anymore. And so now I'm at a point where I'm an independent. I'm not a Republican. I have to tell people this all the time. I am not a Republican. They're like, you're a party. No, not
Black
my party.
conservative, right? Black conservative.
Right.
They
Black
love that title. Yeah.
I have no control over what people call me, but I don't even know if I'm a black conservative.
Right.
Right. I'm conservative on some things, right? On family, sure,
Yeah.
but not on everything. I don't care if gay people get married.
Yeah.
Don't care. Doesn't mean that I'm gay or that I'm advocating for or anything like that. You live your life. I think that's pretty liberal of me to say that. So, there are many things that I am pretty liberal on. I think, and I've been talking for a little bit, but the last thing I'll
Oh,
say
please do.
is, um, the one area that I completely switched, because a lot of the things I'm pretty much the same. The party left me more than I left them.
Yeah.
But the one area I completely switched is abortion. I was pro-choice. I'm wholly and I'm radically pro-life.
Wow. Okay, I have to ask on that one because so for myself,
Mm-hmm.
my story is very similar to yours. I think you and I are very similar in age. I'm 41. I'm a 90s kid. I woke up to the real world on September 11th, 2001. I
Mm-hmm.
hated Bush and Cheney like every other, red-blooded kid at that time, right?
Right.
I hated neoconservatism. And see what I saw it happen was I saw neoconservatism become neoliberalism. All
Mm-hmm.
those fucking scumbags that were, part of the Bush Cheney scaffolding kind of stayed in place when the Bush Cheney regime left and the Obama regime came in.
Mm-hmm.
And, for myself, like I was one of those kids where I was in my 20s. I didn't know shit about the world. And, I was just as excited about Barack Obama, I think, as any other human being on earth at the time. Right. I mean, still, I feel regardless of whatever he did while he was in office, symbolically, he was extremely important to the United States. Right.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you looked at what he did during his time there and the just the rapid expansions of wars in the Middle East, his last year in office, he dropped 3 bombs per hour, 24 hours a day for the entire year. Right.
Mm-hmm.
That was the way it averaged out. Um, but you could see that he was, if you really knew what you were looking at, he was a Wall Street president, right?
Yeah.
And he wasn't as marketed, right? And so that was where I began to leave. I started to see this radical leftist ideology being piped into the West during the Occupy movement, actually, because I had a unique advantage in that I spent most of my life reading history, 20th century history specifically. So I was able to recognize a lot of the Maoist ideas that were arriving in America at the time and in Canada, because naturally we receive everything from you guys 5 years down the road. That's why we end up with boy bands while you guys are on to the, to the next thing. But 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 yeah, that was where I started to break from the left, because I saw what was happening, and I saw that, liberal politics was developing into a like a dogmatic ideology, like a religion, a cult in a sense, right?
Yeah.
And I knew the danger of the other ideas that were coming down the pike, right? Like gay marriage was one of those issues that, you probably had the same reaction. I remember when it became a thing during, I think it was 2012. Everybody, I was like, this is still a problem. Like, no, people still give a fuck about this. People still care. Like,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, of course, get married. You know what I mean? But it was a wedge issue that was specifically manufactured by left-wing media in order to create an enemy where there wasn't one, in order to create
Right.
opposition where it didn't exist. And so I saw what was happening at that time. Now, of course, I want to return to what you just said, because I have always reserved the right as a man to be just not have an opinion on the abortion thing, because it is way too complicated. I'm not a woman. I don't, I don't create life, right? I contribute to it, but I don't create it. And so for me, I understand the pro-life argument. I understand the pro-choice argument, and I've always kind of sat on the sidelines for that one. But please give me your input on this, man, because I have no idea what to think.
So part of the problem with being a party person is that you end up doing stuff that you don't completely agree with,
Mm,
but you're just doing because that's what you're supposed to do. And it's one thing, like we see sanctuary cities, right?
right.
It's easy to be like, sanctuary city, yes, of course. But then when you start sending, hundreds of thousands of people, we're like, wait, hold on a
Right.
second.
Right.
It's a little bit different when it hits home. And that's the same thing with abortion.
Right.
it's easy to be pro-choice and to say these things, but when it hits home into your relationship, it feels different. And so and I've written about this, so it's not the first time I talked about it. My ex-girlfriend, when she came to me and said, I'm pregnant, and I already had a son at the time with a different woman, and I told her, like a good Democrat, I support your choice, right? And looking back at it, that's not what any woman wants to hear. A woman wants to hear, oh my God, I'm so happy. Let's do this, right? That's what she really wants to hear. She doesn't want to hear like, hey, whatever you want to do. And I also realize that now, that it's unfair to put the entire ball into a woman's court, right? When we both were involved in creating this child. And so I did that. I said those words, and that created ambiguity. It revolved around if I want this child or not, if I want to be a father or not. And she's already unsure herself, right? Because she wasn't expecting to get pregnant. And she goes and has an abortion. And I drive her there. I stay outside. She has the abortion. And I take her home, and I see the look on her face as she is completely down. And she is absolutely sad because she knows exactly what she did. And that drive home, I felt like I didn't do the right thing. Like it didn't sit well with me. And as I got older, like it's always been in the back of my mind that I didn't do the right thing. And especially like in the past few years, with my political awakening and all this other stuff, and really honing in on what does it mean to be a man and a father, and watching my son, in his teenage years and growing up in front of me. And I realized my biggest issue was that as a father, my job was to protect my child. I can't force her not to have an abortion, right? Because that would be illegal. I'd be kidnapping her or something like that. But I could do everything possible to discourage it. And I didn't do that. I didn't protect my child. I gave in and just told her, I give away my role in protecting my child, and you do whatever you want, right? No input, no sign of protection. And I personally think she might have kept the child if I didn't do that. But I didn't. I didn't show a sign of protection. I didn't show a sign of confidence or surety of what I wanted to do. And that happened. And I regret it. And I know many women who've had abortions where like you can't get rid of that feeling. Like they know what they did. And I always say this. When I was a Democrat, we didn't pretend we didn't know what abortion was, right? We weren't pro-abortion. We were pro-choice, right? Which is kind of, honestly, kind of like a lukewarm, stance, where like, I wouldn't have an abortion, but if that's what they want, it's that kind of, fine. All right, whatever. That's the stance. And that's the stance that I used to have. But when you put it in practice, it is a very anti-human stance. It's a very anti-human thing. It'd be like if I said, listen, I wouldn't murder anybody, but listen, I don't want to take away your right to murder someone. And it becomes this whole rationality as to no one wants to feel like they're committing murder. Right. No one. The doctors don't want to feel that way. The woman that's doing doesn't want to feel that way. So everybody must pretend that it's not a human being. That it is not the beginning stages of creating a human being that would walk around. So that's why they debate, well, it's embryos, or it's this, it's that. And they want to go to these far out of whack interpretations of the most basic thing is life. Right? And to me, like, my heart and my soul doesn't say I didn't protect my embryo. I didn't protect my child. Right. And I think that's something completely different. So my stance has changed because I removed myself from the party and started thinking about my principles and started thinking about the choices that I made in my life, the things that I regret. And so I can't change what she did. And ultimately, like, it was her choice to do what she did, right? That's the unfair thing about abortion. It's your fault. But what I'm saying is, as a man, while I'm not the one giving birth to the child, I helped to create the circumstance for this child to exist in the first place. And I think we should be allowed to say, like, hey, my job as a man, as a father, is to protect my child. And fuck yeah, I should be allowed to have an opinion on if my child is born or not,
Mm.
right? Not saying that I could kidnap the woman and prevent her from having an abortion, but I can have an opinion if you kill my kid. So I think men should be allowed to say, it's not as simple as go ahead and it's not, how dare I say something because I'm not the one giving birth to it. No, no, no. When that child is born, I'm 50-50 responsible for it. So why all of a sudden I have zero rights when that child is within that belly? I have no say, no opinion when that child is in your stomach before you give birth. So I just think that there's something wrong about that message. I think it tells men that shut up and let her deal with it. Shut up and let her have all the burden, all the choice, and all the decision making, which is an unfair burden to put on a woman when the dynamic is between a man and a woman who created this child. So my viewpoint has wildly changed from pro-choice to wholly pro-life, radically pro-life, no exceptions.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
No, please continue. Please
Oh
continue your thought.
no. Part of the reason I say no exceptions is because I've had conversations with people who were born out of rape and people who were raped and had children. So you mean to tell me that this person that I know personally who was born out of rape, their life is less value because of how they were created?
Mm.
Like, when I think about it logically, I can't swallow that. It's punishing the child for the sins of the father. They had no choice in the matter. They were created. And if I am to say, as someone who's trying to be sort of like has some sort of Christian base, if I'm to say that life is precious and that children are precious and that we are all created equally, except, right? Like, that doesn't sit right with me to say, well, accept that child who was created out of a rape. It is a absolute unfortunate circumstance when that happens. But I don't think there are exceptions to life being valuable,
Mm.
especially when they talk about the most innocent, a child.
Yeah, absolutely. See, for me, where I've always stood on this is, I'm not, like I said, it's such a difficult subject to discuss and to even really consider, right? Because there are so many variables involved. Um,
Yeah.
right. But, the problem that I've always had is that there is this laissez-faire attitude on the left, right? And it's exactly what you just said. It's trying to dress up what you're doing, right? It's trying
Hmm.
to obscure the harsh realities of what's happening. And, by referring to it as a clump of cells or an embryo and not life and not scientific intervention into the most powerful and and uh and necessary of all of the human gifts, right?
Right.
And that's always been kind of what leans me toward being pro-life, is the attitude that's taken toward the act itself. And I think you're right. Is it I just said, I think intended, or the way that they approach it is with the intention of taking the sting out of it, taking the reality out of it, right? And
Right.
dulling it down so that it doesn't seem as harsh as it really is. But if we treated abortion like what it actually is, I think that there would be less women likely to seek out abortions after becoming pregnant, because it's not a matter of guilting them into what they're about to do. It's a matter of just living in the real world. And we've
Yeah.
gotten away from that, right? And I myself, I've listened to like a number of, really far left podcasts and watched their media and stuff. And the thing that always grabs me is just how everything is relates back to the core tenets of the ideology, right? Like you can't
Hmm.
break away from those tenets on any level. Like if you talk to Christians, and I recently, just last year, had my own spiritual reawakening. I reestablished my relationship with God. So I've had a lot of conversations with Christians over the last year, just kind of rediscovering that connection for myself. And there's a lot of variation in the Christian world and the way that they perceive, especially the Gospels, right? What Jesus said, right? And there's a lot of different interpretations of it, and you can see that people are kind of wrestling with the ideas to apply them to their lives in a way that makes sense, right? But with this far left ideology, and now we're seeing it happen on the right. We're seeing a similar ideology emerge on the right.
Hmm.
There's no wiggle room. There's no room for exploration, or as you described earlier, curiosity, right? It's
Right.
this is what it is. You follow this, or you're just not part of the club. You're ostracized from your community. You're no longer part of this. And
Right.
myself, my mother is Plains Cree Indian, so I've I've kind of had this weird experience throughout my life where I half exist in that community and I half don't. And when I've
Hmm.
expressed views and opinions that go against, what is typically the liberal ideology that's been imported into that community, I've been told I have a colonized mind. I'm colonized. I'm, basically colonized is the word that always comes up,
Right.
right? And it's crazy because, I've spent a lot of my life reading about my own history and reading about where I come from. So it's
Hmm.
strange to be told that I'm no longer part of the group because I don't subscribe to the right ideas, right?
Right.
Which I think you and I both recognize a lot of those ideas are are imported into the communities with the intent to keep those people in line, right? To
Yeah.
control the range of thought.
Yeah, in some ways, and I think that there's a human nature with defining, like we're creatures that like group orientation, like no matter what. Like I know when I travel abroad, if I come across an American, I'm like, oh hey, like it doesn't
Yeah.
matter what they look like. I'm like,
Right.
you're American, like
Right.
like that's something I think that's normal. We find our tribe, so to speak. So, but when it comes to that, when there is a tribe, there is also power, right? There is there is a definition of how do you fit into this tribe, what's allowed within this tribe, right? And who gets to define what's in this tribe and what becomes normal within this tribe. And so over a period of time, once those things start to slowly develop and become normalized, well, then you have the gatekeepers, right? And what ends up happening is someone like yourself, and actually, coincidentally, I wrote an article for the Black Sheep Substack. It'll be coming out sometime soon, but I just finished it this morning talking about this very thing. And as I'm writing, I'm thinking about this. Part of the reason why they don't like people like me and you is because we disrupt their power. Because one thing I found out is by speaking out, I found that there's a lot of people who are just like me. They don't have a platform and they're reluctant to say something, but they feel exactly the same way that I do. And then over a period of time, they start saying stuff, right? So then they're like, yeah, how come? Right? And then more people just become curious and they start questioning. And then you see how the gatekeepers become extra paranoid and extra nervous that we need to, and they start calling everybody out and they start freaking out. And it's because they black sheeps of any group ruin the power dynamic within that group. And it because they want to keep it a particular way that everybody feels comfortable, right?
Mm-hmm.
They don't like it when it becomes uncomfortable, right? And it doesn't even have to be about race or ethnicity. It could be about political ideology. It's the same thing. On the right, there is this is how you are substantially on the right. On the left, this is how you are substantially on the left. And if you raise your hand and say, hey, but what about this? They say, you must be from the other side.
Mm.
You must hate yourself, right? Then that's when they use the shaming tactics, right? On the right, they call you a rhino because you had a question about something, or you said, "Hey, aren't we supposed to say this is not good?" Right? Shut up, you rhino. Right? They try to shame you out of it. Why? Because if you're loud and you can start to shift the dynamic, and they like having control over the group, and they like the purity tests, right? It reaffirms the conformity. It reaffirms all this bullshit that they have control over. They do not like individuality.
Mm.
And even some of the very people who would scream about individualism, when you put them to the test, they are not about individualism. Not on everything. On certain things, sure. When it benefits them, it's individualism. But when it doesn't benefit them, then it doesn't. It's no longer about individualism. The same thing for the people who are colorblind when it benefits them, and not colorblind when it doesn't benefit them. So it's pick your poison. These are inconsistent people, and human beings tend to be very inconsistent. It's hard to be consistent on how you see the world, on your viewpoints and things like that. But when you stand up and you're the black sheep, man, people come for you. But I'll tell you this, the strongest people are the black sheeps,
Mm.
because despite the pressure, despite the shaming tactics, despite all the bullshit, the slander, the coming after you, the threats, and you still stand around, people notice that, right? And it's the ones that do apologize when they don't need to apologize. It's the ones that do shut up. It's the ones that do go away, the ones that do change their stance because their economics are threatened, all this other stuff, or who do want to fit in. No, 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 no. That's not what I meant. What I'm actually trying to say. Those are the people who lose respect, and the people who are on the fence about saying something go back to conforming because now they're scared. So I think that there's extreme value in people like yourself and people like me, um, who are willing to say, I don't care if you call me a coon. Like, you can't shame me into changing my mind. You can't shame me into, like, when they do that, I literally laugh
Yeah.
because I'm not insecure about myself, not anymore. Right? I've had
Mm.
my struggles, but I am absolutely comfortable with everything that I say. No one's paid me to say this. If I get
Mhm.
paid, it's because I said it and they like what I had to say, and that's why I got paid. But I'm
Yeah.
not getting paid to say something that I don't actually believe. And you cannot shame me into changing my stance. You can't slander me to the point where I'm like, you know what, I apologize. You can't do that to me. And I actually wanted to write an article talking about this, but it's that fear. It's that fear that they try to keep people under control. And
Mm.
I refuse to have that fear control me. When I wrote my book, I spent 9 months telling myself I could lose my job, people could come after me, and I have to be absolutely okay with that. Did it
Yeah.
happen? No. The complete opposite happened. So it's that kind of thing that people have to become stronger about. Are certain people in more risk than others? Sure. In certain industries, sure. But if you feel compelled to do something, then you can't be scared to do it, because
Mm.
that fear will eat you up and you'll regret not saying something.
That's beautiful, man. Yeah, I completely agree. I want to ask you, where does that strength come from? Because see, for me, I've always been a lone wolf. I've spent a lot of my life alone because I never really fit anywhere, and
Right.
so it was natural for me to create my own, to not follow any line of thought, to not fall into any, silly ideologies or anything, because I had been on my own for so long. I had spent so much of my life figuring things out for myself. I didn't really need to follow anybody as I got older. So for yourself, where does that strength come from to stand alone and to say what you really believe?
Um, Much of the same place. When I was a kid, I lived in 4 states before the age of 18, and moved within those states at times. So many times I was the new kid in school. I was new at this, um, didn't know anybody. And, actually, it's funny because I just wrote about all this. So now I'm like talking about it. Um, but like for example, I lived in upstate New York. I was
Mm.
one of 4 black kids in the entire school district. And then we moved to New Jersey, in central Jersey, and half the school is black,
Right.
right? And I dress different, I talk different, I carry myself different as a kid than just about everybody else
Mm.
who look like me. When I was in upstate New York, I was the racial minority by
Mm.
definition, right? I was the extreme minority. And I didn't completely fit in that respect either. I don't get me wrong, I had friends. I wasn't treated like horribly or anything like that, but I didn't completely fit in.
Mm.
Um, and it doesn't help that I'm always the new kid into these different school districts and these different places. So not fitting in is something that was just normal. Like when I was in high school, my friends in many ways were the rejects, right? They were the skater kids, they were the goth kids, they were the kids who weren't part of the cool clique, who were rejected for different reasons. And they were my friends, and I really liked them.
Mm.
And that's kind of always been my thing. I've always hung out with the kids who were on the fringe when I was in school because I was on the fringe. I wasn't I wasn't black enough. Just to be frank, I wasn't black enough. And to some of the white kids, I wasn't black enough either, right? Because they were more comfortable with me with the idea of a black person who carries
Right.
himself in a different way and talks in your box.
Postures.
You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? Yeah, and
Yeah. Yeah.
postures in a different way. And I'm not like that,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I think for me, especially by the time I made it into the adult years, I realized like I have no interest in forcing people to like me.
Mm.
I think it was late in high school when I really like came to that conclusion. Like, I don't want to force people to like me. Like, I don't want to do any of that stuff. Like, there was a short period of time when I moved to New Jersey, and I was ignored. I think that's the best way of kind of putting it. I
Mm.
wasn't picked on, but I was definitely not noticeable. I was ignored. I didn't fit in. I didn't fit in with the other black kids, most of them. And then I was like, okay. And then I went shopping and got some hip hop gear. And all of a sudden, people noticed me and saw me. And then all of a sudden, these 2 girls, oh, Adam's cute.
Right.
Oh, is that Adam? Adam, is that you? Oh my! Then all of a sudden, people saw me, but I felt like a fraud.
Yeah.
Like that wasn't me. I didn't feel comfortable doing that. So that only lasted for like 2 weeks. And then I went back to what felt comfortable. And then I went back to being ignored. And I'm fine with that. As an adult, I'm absolutely fine with that.
Yeah.
And when I started speaking out and saying how I felt, you know, what ends up happening is that the political right starts to embrace you. And I embrace them back because I like many people who are on the right. I think a lot of them are good people. But what ends up happening is that there is a box,
Mm.
right? You're supposed to say these things. There's an expectation that you say these things. There's an expectation that you say these things as a black conservative, right? You're supposed to just reflexively say that everything was fine until welfare. Like,
Right.
like you're just
Right.
supposed to say these things. And I'm like, but not every black person back then was on welfare. Like,
Right.
why would that? Like, so you're not supposed to ask. There is a black conservative prototype that you're supposed to abide by.
Right.
And I'm just like, I'm moving about. I'm leaving the left, and there's a box. I'm more embraced on the political right, and I notice that there are certain people who like a box as well. And then I see the buffoonery that has to happen, whether it's white conservatives, black conservatives, or whoever, that you have to say to gain notoriety.
Yeah.
You know, you have to act this way. You have to act outlandish. I'm not outlandish.
Right.
Like, I'm not that person. I just believe what I believe, and if you don't like it, that's fine. And I just want to move on with my day. I want to be able to sleep at night, and I don't want to sacrifice myself to gain more attention.
Yeah.
And so one of the things is, like, I just realized that there's a lot of attempting to put people in that box. And I think that's part of our nature, is that once there's some sort of group, there's certain people who want to have some sort of purity test to make sure you really belong in this group. Are you really a conservative? Are
Mm.
you really a liberal? Like, are you really these things? And I say, fuck them. Like,
Yeah.
I don't want to
Yeah.
pass your test.
Yeah.
Like, fine, I failed your test. Now go
Yeah.
fuck yourself. I'm Adam. I
Yeah.
want to do my own thing, and so be it. I'm not part of your group. Then fine, I'll form my own.
Yeah. It's interesting how those stereotypes exist no matter where you travel, right? Like,
Yeah,
you were in high school, you tried the black uniform, which is in quotes because it's
yeah,
a ridiculous fucking concept. But, you tried that, you didn't really fit there. You're embraced by the political right. Now you're expected to say the things, right? You're expected to be the second coming of Thomas Sowell, right? Like you're
right.
expected to be that guy and not yet have your own ideas. And that's the thing that I've always really struggled with myself is how do you not become a caricature, right? And I think what you just said really is the way to do it, is to just be you. Fuck
Hmm.
everybody else. Who cares what they have to say? Just express your own views and opinions. And when you think about it, I think that's where most human beings exist. We all exist in that gray area, right? Some of us,
Right.
we have liberal beliefs. Some of us have what would be considered conservative beliefs. We're all over the place, most of us. But
Yeah.
it's those boxes that are created that were intended to, well, that we're supposed to squeeze into to fit within whatever stupid fucking group you're a part of, right? So it's like,
Hmm.
you sag your pants one week and then the next week you wear a suit, but you don't fit anywhere. And that was really interesting what you said about that, because like I was in the same boat. I was never Indian enough for the Indians. I mean, look at me. I do not look. My complexion is not even close. But I was never white enough for the white kids. And
Right.
so, like I was always kind of on my own, doing my own thing. I always had my group of friends, but it was very much similar to yours, where it was like we were kind of like the outsiders. We weren't part of really any group. We all just kind of fell together because none of us fit within any of those categories. Now as adults, all of those people that I knew who were part of that group are all the coolest people that I know, because they continued on through life just doing their own thing, right?
Right.
And I wanted to ask you about that, because you talked about putting on the black uniform for 2 weeks, and like I want to ask you just existing within America, because I know what it's like to be. We classify it here in Canada as Métis. I know what
Hmm.
it's like to be Métis in Canada, and kind of being visible yet invisible at the same time. What is life like when you're considered like the black conservative guy? Like what's the reaction that you get, like from people within your own community, people outside of the community? Like, I guess what I'm really trying to ask is do you find yourself being tokenized by certain people at certain points?
I think there are people who attempt to.
Yeah.
Um, so like it's like anything. You have no control what people call you. You have no control over how people reference you. Like those things you don't have any control over. I have control over my words. I have control over what I say and how I say it. So, how people see me is really, most of the time, it's the avatar that they have about me.
Mm.
And I know that it's not really personal. It's annoying sometimes, but it's not really personal. So if there's some pro-black, I automatically hate Republicans or all white supremacist racists, and every black person who has any sort of fondness to a Republican is a coon and says X, Y, and Z, even though I've never said that. I'm not a Republican. I've never claimed to be a Republican. I voted for a Republican one time in my life.
Right, right.
Right. So, but they can't conceptualize that. Right. And so that person automatically hates me. Um, and they will claim how I feel about whatever without actually knowing exactly what I've said.
Mhm.
And I've written about how there is this avatar that people create, and it happens on both political spectrums. That, like, on the right, they think every person who's a Democrat is all for, mutilating children. But I know that there are Democrats who do not like this stuff,
Mhm.
right? Who are actual liberals, right? They're not progressives,
Mhm.
but they just lump them all together and say, ah, you voted for Biden, so you must like mutilating kids and blah 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 blah, and they just lump them all together, right? They take the worst of whatever it is, create an avatar and say, you are loosely associated to it, so you must be that thing.
Mm.
Same thing with Trump. Are there nice Trump supporters? The vast majority of them are. Are there some crazy nut job supporters? Absolutely. And they just take the worst of those supporters and lump them in and say, "Oh, MAGA is just all racist and crazy, blah blah blah," and you're now the avatar. So if you're loosely associated with MAGA, you must be that thing. And like that stuff, at the end of the day, doesn't bother me.
Mm.
Like it doesn't. You have no control over it, and I don't get bothered over what I can't control. Um, so I'll tell you this one funny story. This happened a while ago. So Turning Points has a division called Turning Points Faith, and they actually a couple times they offer for me to go and speak. And one of the times I spoke at a church. It wasn't a big turnout, but I spoke at a church, and I talked about my story as a kid, and it talked about the importance of family. So someone was getting to some sort of Twitter back and forth argument, and then someone tagged me and saying, "You should follow Adam," and Adam has said blah blah blah, and they always try to bring you into stuff. Like, stop bringing me into this.
Right.
And so and so then that person was like searching me, and then they found the flyer with me at Turning Points. It's like, this guy who's associated with this white supremacist organization. And so I said to them, "Do you know what I talked about at that event? I talked about the importance of fathers and families. Do you disagree with the importance of fathers and families?" And they would not answer that question, because I brought them that reality of, hey, we weren't saying we didn't have pitchforks and saying the left is bad. I didn't talk about politics at all. I talked about faith, and I talked about the importance of family and taking care of your kids, and the importance of fathers and how it impacted me as a child. Do you disagree with these things? Right? And that person refused to answer that question and just went rah, 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 and just went on, and ended up blocking them because I don't really care.
Right.
But that's the avatar. And so, like, what do people think? I really don't care, because I know that most of the time, if they don't like me, it's not because of something that I said. It's what I represent.
Mm.
And that's like, I have no control over that. So if they don't like me, then they don't like me. And I keep my sanity by not going through comments. But I also, I truly believe, like, you get the energy that you put out.
Yeah.
So if I put out antagonistic nonsense, if I tweeted like Matt Walsh, well, I can't be shocked that people are trying to, kill me and calling death threats and doing stuff, because he's more antagonistic, way more than I am. And I just don't do that, because I believe that the energy I'm trying to put out is generally positive. And I'm trying to say how I feel without being an asshole. And 9 times out of 10, that works. And I don't get the same level of hatred. I also, because of that, don't get the same level of notoriety as other people. And I'm absolutely fine with that.
Yeah, dude, I had this exact conversation with somebody the other day, because, with my podcast and with my writing and stuff, I'm playing the long game like you. I refuse to be antagonistic and sensationalistic and compromise my integrity for the sake of clicks, right? Which is really what they're after. Like, when you see this stuff coming from whoever, it doesn't, have to be anybody in particular, but when you see it, because it's specifically antagonistic toward a certain group that they know is going to react, and that is going to generate the ad revenue if their X profile or their X account is monetized, or is going to get people to click over to whatever video that has the new sensationalist thing. And it's lowest common denominator thinking. And the problem that I have with it is that it ripples out into the real world, right? Because there are a lot of dumb fucking people. And I said this to Brett Weinstein, but stupid is a choice, right? It's not something you're born with, right? We choose to be stupid. And there are a lot of stupid fucking people out there, right? Because they're making the choice to be intellectually lazy. And those people are what follow that shit and echo that shit into the real world. And that's where the problems really happen, right? Is when that stuff carries over. So yeah, whoever, whatever, person, commentator got the clicks that they wanted, but now you have a real problem that actually exists. I really feel like if we were all to just sit down and say, hey, look, this is how I really think about this, and this is, I've put a lot of thought into it, and this is my opinion and my perspective, I think we would find that 90% of us are on the same page about 90% of the issues, and the other
Yeah.
10% wouldn't be that difficult to figure out. The problem is that we're continually being politicized and propagandized and sensationalized to such a degree that it seems like we exist in separate universes now, right? And
Right.
you made reference to being an avatar earlier. It's like that's what we've been reduced to, is an avatar. And so in saying that, I want to ask, because you said something earlier that kind of brought this to mind, and I've always been curious about this weird relationship between Black America and the Democrats, because
Yeah.
to me, I'm of the mind, in Canada, our two-party system, well, we have a three-party system, but really a two-party system. Our
Hmm.
Democrats are the liberals and our Republicans are the conservatives. And in Canada, it's always kind of been the same way, where it's like, they pander to, uh, Black and Indian and whatever other communities for votes, but it's kind of like they're in the bag. Like liberals just know that, you know, I don't know if the verbiage has reached you guys yet, but in Canada they say racialized, which is fucking ridiculous, because what does that even mean, right? But
Yeah.
it's like they treat it like, oh, these people are in the bag, and if they don't vote for us, it's like what Joe Biden said: if you don't vote for me, you ain't Black, which is insane that he even said that,
Yeah.
right? But I want to ask you about that marriage, because it seems to me, and I'm going on a bit of a diatribe here, but a lot of the a lot of like Black American households that I've known, like Black American friends that I have, people with Caribbean origin, their households tend to be a little bit more on the conservative side. So it's
Right.
always kind of been this strange relationship that Democrats have with Black America. And you wrote a piece recently talking about how there's a shift that's beginning to happen. Can you talk about that relationship, where it stems from, and where it's going in your view?
So obviously, we know that at one period of time, Republicans, Black Americans voted Republican in majority, pre-civil rights,
Right.
especially. So, what changed? I'm not a historian. I know there are different people who have different perspectives on it. But what I can do is talk about what's now and
Yeah.
why it is the way it is right now. I think it has a lot less to do with the race and has more to do with demographics and location. So 60% of Black Americans live in 10 states.
Mm.
You can name these states by the large cities. So New York City and state of New York, Chicago and Illinois. You just keep going down the list. Name the major cities. That's where a lot of Black Americans live. So they either live within those cities or in the surrounding areas. One of the things when you start looking at voting patterns is that the Republican Party representation lacks in cities in the surrounding areas.
Mm.
Right. So it doesn't even matter. Like most of those major cities outside of, let's say, Baltimore and Detroit, which are Black majority, you can say Atlanta as well. Like those are the three cities that are Black majority cities, but the rest aren't. Right. Blacks aren't the majority in New York City. Same in Los Angeles, they're not the majority. So when you start looking at that and you start seeing there is no Republican representation in many of these places. Places like Chicago hasn't had a Republican mayor since the 1800s. I'm sorry, since the early 1900s. I think it was like 1900 something. New Orleans, right? So you think of Louisiana, you think of Deep South Republican state. New Orleans, the city, hasn't had a Republican mayor since the 1800s, since the late 1800s, right? So like none of that stuff has happened. It's not in a vacuum. It's not like, oh, this is something that just happened. It's been like this for a long time. And why is that the case? What exactly is happening? And I just think that it becomes cultural it becomes normal, and you can't vote for something that, one, isn't there, and two, you're not familiar with.
Mm.
And it's illogical. Actually, I'll tell you this. I haven't told anybody this. So um, I recently wrote that article about Tiffany Henyard, right?
We
And
have to talk
someone,
about her, by the way, before you go.
yeah,
So.
yeah. So the basis of the article is me saying that people need to show up for their elections, right?
Mhm.
And one of the things that I often do, and I purposefully do, is the easy bait with articles, especially when you talk about anybody who's black, is to talk about them being black.
Right.
When for me, Tiffany Henyard's issue is not about her being black; it's about her being corrupt.
Right.
Like that's the problem. And I don't think her being corrupt is indicative on anything black. She just happens to be black, right? So, because there's all types of corrupt people who look all types of colors. So I purposely don't talk about that. But
Mm.
what's fascinating, remember, it's not about what happens, it's the reaction that is fascinating to me. I get an email from some guy, ends up in my junk mail, and I happen to see it later in that night. And the guy essentially says, I disagree with you. I think it has to do with black people who vote for anybody who is black. And um, the way I see it, black people are a monolithic group. And I said to him, if you believe that black people will vote for anybody who is black because of Tiffany Henyard's existence, do you understand that every person that she ran against was black? Did you understand that Dalton is a majority black city or village, I should say? It's not even a city, it's a village. It's like 20,000 residents. So everyone's black. So how is this? They will vote for anybody who is black in a black city, or a black village, where everybody that's running for office is black.
Yeah.
Explain that one to me, sir. And then I explained to him that you cannot vote for something that does not exist. When you go down the list, there are no Republican contenders. There is a weak GOP presence, right? And there's so much nuance because I talked to one of my really good friends is she's ran for Congress multiple times as a Republican. And we talk about the nuances with all this stuff. But the reality is that if I go to the ballot and I only see one party that exists, I can only vote for them.
Mm-hmm.
The flip side that I'll hear from the right is, well, they wouldn't win anyways. Then why are we having this conversation?
Right.
Like, if you're just going to have this loser logic, well, they wouldn't have picked me anyways. Like,
Yeah.
well, then shut up.
Yeah.
Like,
you
you don't,
babies. Yeah.
But it's that kind of thing where I just don't think people understand, not even down to the culture, not even down to, they're more conservative. Why are they choosing conservative? They don't even have the option. And what people don't even talk about is it is the same thing in reverse in rural areas.
Right.
You go to rural Alabama. How many Democrats you think are running?
Yeah. Yeah.
They're not.
Yeah.
Right? Why? Because there is not a Democrat presence, right? And it's not just the DNC. People think the DNC or the RNC is like this $1 trillion conglomerate that can just throw money everywhere. No, it's mostly voluntary. They have limited money, and they have to be very, very strategic on where they place that money. Mm-hmm. So you cannot expect them to say, you know what, we're going to take over Chicago and do it like that and throw a whole bunch of money. The reality is, if they wanted to take over Chicago, they could. It would take multiple cycles, and it would take a willingness to lose money. And in politics, no one's saying like, hey, for the future. Like, they're not going to do that. And so when that becomes a mentality for generation and generation, and then you see the voters who get demoralized and they don't even see what's the option. And like, one thing I'll say is this: we don't talk about voter attrition at all. Mm-hmm. So if I live in a city like Chicago, and I know that the Democrats run Chicago, then why am I going out and voting anyways? It's essentially like, well, I'm voting for a communist or someone who's not that much of a communist. Like, so it's like, why even bother? Mm-hmm. Because the Democrats run this place.
Yeah.
And so voter turnout is incredibly low. Chicago's last mayor, Brandon Johnson, And this is why I try to tell people, like, there's so much room if you gave people options, if you actually fought for their vote. City after city, you can go, and I actually did this. You can go from major city to major city. Voter turnout is generally under 20%. So
Wow.
registered voters, so not even like in total, people who are actually registered to vote, 20% turnout. And often it's closer to like 12 and 13%. New York City, 12, 13%
For
voter
local
turnout.
elections. For local
Local
elections. Yeah.
local elections, yep.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's the presidential season, then it's higher,
Hmm.
right? But it's not that much higher, right? It doesn't go from like 12 to 50 or anything like that. It's still low.
Hmm.
But the on the off presidential years, oh, it's dreadful. And so what ends up happening is the people, the pool of people who are actually voting, like it becomes smaller and smaller over a period of time. But the way I see it is, if you're telling me that 15% of the people are turning out to vote, then I'm seeing what, 85% of the people as a possible option,
Yeah.
right? But people don't really see it that way, right? And no one asks the question, well, how come 85% of actual registered voters are sitting at home on their hands? Why aren't they turning out?
Hmm.
And they don't ask these questions. And the reality is that much of our nation lacks competition, whether it's in rural areas and Republicans or in cities and Democrats. They lack competition. And then
Hmm.
everybody says, well, they wouldn't vote for us anyways. And well, you don't even try. And it's not that they just now, it has been like this for generations.
Yeah.
So to the actual question, why do Black Americans vote Democrat, is because there is no choice,
Right.
even if they wanted to. And it's illogical for them to be like, I'm voting Democrat locally and for Trump nationally. That's illogical. Why
Yeah.
would they do that? They have no exposure locally to Republican politicians, to Republican concepts, to Republican ones. Why would all of a sudden they vote for Trump?
Hmm.
Right? Has that happened? Sure. Someone would be like, yeah, I know someone who's done that. All right, fine. You know the one person, but but we're talking about like en masse. It's illogical. It's
Yeah.
absolutely logical. So it's much less about Black people are just rejecting Republicans just cause. Does that exist? Absolutely. And it happens more so because of ignorance. They don't
Mm.
know any Republicans. Republicans aren't fighting for their votes in Chicago, in New York City, in all these different cities around the country.
Hmm.
Every presidential election, you see Pennsylvania counting their votes. It's red until they go to Philadelphia and Pittsburgh.
Right.
So like, and
Right.
then they lose the election because Philadelphia and Pittsburgh have more people than the rest of the state. Like, duh.
Right.
And yet Republicans, and I know this for a fact, I know Republicans who will not go into Philadelphia. They will not go. They'll run for Senate in Pennsylvania. They'll run for Congress in Pennsylvania, especially Senate. They'll run for
Hmm.
state Senate. They will not go into Philadelphia.
Which is insane. Which is like, yeah. And it's like, well, I mean, first of all, it's a defeatist attitude, right? Because it's what you said. Like, they wouldn't vote for me anyways, which is fucking crazy. But,
Mm-hmm.
I also think too, it's like, I think if you see, like with Democrats and with liberals, and I've always felt this way even as a liberal, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of them are wolves in sheep's clothing, right? And a lot of the lullabies that they tell people about free stuff is exactly that, right? It's a fairy tale, and it's
Right.
intended to put them to sleep so that they won't pay attention to the sleight of hand that's going on behind their back. And I even knew this as a liberal myself. I just
Mm-hmm.
always felt that socially liberals were better, and I felt that social issues, at a time when we were, in previous years when we were experiencing a lot of prosperity, there was a certain amount of attention that had to be paid to social issues that were, still open source, I would say, culturally, right?
Right.
But I think that if conservatives are, and I hate the term conservative, just rational human beings, because at this point in time, all you got to do is point to the left and go, "Come on, guys, really?"
Mm-hmm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like, really, you're going to vote for this? I mean, look at Joe Biden. Come on. The guy's brain dead. It's very obvious he's not running the show there, that there is an apparatus behind him, right?
Right.
And we're at a very unique time in our history because, here in Canada, we're experiencing the same thing. We have Justin Trudeau, which is like, there is not one, I don't think there is a human soul in our country that is interested in keeping that guy as our leader. Right. But yet here he is, and yet here we are. So we're at this very potentially transformative period. Right. And, in the US, you have Trump, and you do have Black and Hispanic voters who are looking at Trump like, yeah, this is a viable option, because look at the last 4 years of Biden versus the previous 4 years of Trump. On top of that, you have tens of thousands of illegal immigrants flowing through your southern border, many of whom are being bussed and dropped into majority Black neighborhoods in the inner cities, which is just goes to show you, right? Like, how much Democrats really give a fuck at the end of the day, right? Like, they're not bringing them into, whatever, upstate New York, right? They're dropping them in fucking Brooklyn, right? Or South Side Chicago. And so I actually wanted to ask you about that because, in the United States right now, like, there's a lot of tension regarding this issue, this illegal immigrant issue. Where you're located, have you seen a lot of impact from that?
So I live in New Jersey, and if anybody's been to New Jersey is mostly suburbs.
Right.
So you have to have a car to get anywhere around here. So it's not the most ideal place. But I will say this, and I say that in a joking way, but one thing that people don't realize is that New Jersey has had massive amounts of immigration from Hispanic nations. Some of it is illegal immigration here, like it's the truth. And I will tell you, there are cities and towns in New Jersey that are majority Hispanic. Mm-hmm. Absolutely majority Hispanic. You go there will be signs in Spanish and English. The language that you hear most often spoken is Spanish. Mm-hmm. It is people from all different parts of Latin America that are living within these cities, and Spanish is the most common language that's spoken there. And there are various towns and cities like that throughout New Jersey. That is not uncommon, and it's been like that for quite some time. So, but that is part of I think there's always going to be some sort of form of illegal immigration. But what you're seeing now is an industry, a massive industry of worldwide illegal immigration that is powered by the Mexican cartels, right? That is saying, pay us and we'll help you on the final part of your voyage and show you the way through the desert to make it to the border, and you'll be A-okay, because the United States is ballless right now, and all they do is take you, process you, and throw you all over the country and feed you, and you can stay there as long as you want. Everything's rainbow and sunshines. And a lot of people who are coming through are under this perception that they make it here and they can start working. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people are economic migrants. They want another opportunity. Fine, that's great. However, there are rules and processes. I've been watching a lot of coverage with independent journalists talking to migrants, because they're always waiting in lines. They're always waiting, and they're waiting around because they can't do anything. Many of them can't work because they know that they need papers. When they've attempted to work, they say, sorry, you need to have working papers. You need to have, you need to be here legally for me to hire you. And they can't. So they're just standing around. And many of them don't have cases until, let's say, a year. Mm-hmm. So what is a, I don't know, late 20s-year-old man do? When he has to stand around for a year, he can't work. He's completely dependent on the government, and he can't stay in New York forever, right? So I think it's an unfortunate situation for everybody that's involved. I don't think it's a good situation. I don't think it's a situation that can be sustainable. Um, we are we are incredibly vulnerable. I don't wish for this to happen, but I am very worried that there might be some sort of terrorist attack because of the weakness of our southern border. When I'll tell you this, what ends up happening is when the political right is correct about something, the mainstream media denies, denies, denies. When you start seeing the mainstream media confirm what the right is saying, you know that there's a problem. So when you see 60 Minutes at the border watching Chinese person after Chinese person walk through the same part of the gate over and over and over, and they're talking to the rancher who owns the property that they're coming on, and he says, yeah, it's happening all day, every single day for years now,
Right.
you know there's a problem. And you cannot hide that is a problem. See, before it was xenophobia and oh, it's not, that caravan is not really a caravan. Now, guess what? New Yorkers, when we have the media elite who are residing in DC and New York, they now have to deal with it,
Mm-hmm.
right? They now have to see it. They now have to see the desperation, right? Because this is the same shit that people in Texas and the other border states have been dealing with for quite some time, right? And it was inevitable that this was going to happen. So guess what? Sanctuary city, now you have to deal with it. What are you going to do,
Mm-hmm.
right? And here's the problem. Someone like Eric Adams has actually gone to Biden and said, if we're going to do this and you're going to fail at the border, you need to give us money. And the Biden administration says no. So what does that mean? Well, we got to take care of these people then. So we got to raise taxes. We're going to take away from this funding. We're going to cut this. Hey, that school that your kids are going to, we have to house people there. Those hotels that we used to have tourists in that would bring revenue into the city, half of them gone from tourists. Now they're migrant shelters. Now we have this entire industry that's being brought upon. I don't know how many of these guys are part of gangs that are in Central America, right? Like we look at El Salvador, which locked up, I think it was like 75,000 people, and crime all of a sudden disappeared because all the gang activity was gone. Well, how many of those guys who were from El Salvador made it up here? How many of them, the Venezuelans who were part of gangs, made it up here as well? Like, we don't know. This is not good. And they're linking up with other gangs within New York City and committing crimes. On top of that, New York City has decriminalized crime.
It's so stupid, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like it's so counterintuitive in every way. It's like, it's like if you wanted to destroy the greatest city on earth, this is exactly the way to do it.
Yeah. This is part of the communist movement, right? You have to destabilize. And how do you destabilize? You force open migration.
Yeah.
You decriminalize crime, right? You serve no penalties. You become lenient. And here's the thing about crime that a lot of people don't understand. Crime is extremely minor. It involves an extreme minority amount of people. It doesn't take that many people to feel unsafe, right? So if you have a neighborhood of 5,000 people, but if 100 of them have guns and they're gang members, everyone feels unsafe. That is enough to terrorize everyone. Maybe even 50 is enough to terrorize everyone. I was talking to a guy from Minnesota. They were having a rash of car thefts and carjackings. Come to find out, it was 12 people. 12 people. An entire city like Minneapolis, 12 people were the ones who were the culprits who were causing most of the trouble.
Holy shit.
And that's the thing that people don't realize. It doesn't take that many people to destroy a neighborhood, a section of the city, or an entire city. Now import 1 million people into New York City, and let's just say that 1% of them are bad people. 1% of them are gang members or criminals or who might do something. That's a lot of fucking people.
Yeah.
That's a lot of fucking people. We don't have that many cops. Cops are quitting left and right in New York City. They're done. They're not getting the proper support. They're slashing funding. Like, New York City is an absolute mess. And here's the thing. The what people also don't understand that aren't involved in New York politics or talk to people involved in New York politics, all of the New York politicians are scared of the progressive left. And this is part of the problem, because there is only one party. It's like basically New York is one party dominance, the
Right.
Democrats. So because of that, it's not we're afraid of the Republicans primarying us. We're afraid of the progressive left primarying us. So it is why you hear Mayor Adams occasionally use some inclusivity, and he says like the occasional buzzword. It's
Right.
because he's trying to signal to the sympathetic progressive voter that resides in New York City, so they don't kick him out of office during re-election to put in somebody else who's a fucking communist. Like that is the danger of one party rule
Yeah.
in these places, especially in a place like New York City, which has a lot to lose and has a lot of resources. But that's the fight that's happening in New York City. It's not against Republicans in New York. They're they're barely to be found. There are some Republicans in New York City. They're barely to be found. The fight is between, quite literally, the socialists and communists who are in New York City, who are within government, who are fighting the status quo Democrats, who are somewhat liberal.
So it's just varying shades of insanity. Really, it's
Yeah.
just like you're gonna vote for the less insane person because the more insane person is so fucking insane. This place might not exist after they're elected, which is
Yep.
I don't know if you saw it. Like, so I've been watching this migrant crisis unfold, and I've spoken to a few people on my podcast about it. I've had JJ Carroll. He's a retired deputy agent in charge along the southern border in San Diego. He knows quite a bit about this, and he's been watching it closely. And he said
Mhm.
in his entire career, he arrested what they refer to as being special interest aliens, which is, people who with ties to gangs or criminal groups or terrorist organizations. He said in his entire career, he arrested maybe 3 of them. And he, in every circumstance, they were processed and shipped out of the United States within 24 hours, sent back to where
Mm.
they came from. Well, in 2023, they had a policy of arresting the special interest aliens and then just letting them go. And we're talking thousands, thousands and thousands and thousands, right?
Right.
And you're right. It like your 12th person in Minneapolis analogy is bang on, because really all it takes is one crazy person, right? All it takes is, people don't realize that a nuclear warhead is roughly only about a good one is about 3 feet long and 12 inches in diameter. You could put that in a suitcase, right?
Mm.
And so that's what I'm saying is just like, we all hope that nothing bad is going to come out of this, or nothing bad is going to happen. But with just allowing people to walk into your country, you are drastically increasing the probability of something significantly, life altering, country changing occurring. Right.
Yeah.
And, I don't know if you've been keeping up with this either, but, you also have thousands of military age Chinese men that are flowing into the United States right now, and nobody really knows why. Right. And these people are coming in a different way. They're all coming up through the Darien Gap, but the Central and South American migrants are being housed in different camps from the Chinese migrants. Like, the Chinese migrants are taking a different path. They all have money. They all have cell phones. They're taking boats instead of walking through the jungles at the Darien Gap.
Mhm.
So there's something going on here. There's some sort of effort to get these people into the United States, and nobody really knows why. And my thing is, well, does everybody want to sit back and just find out why? You know, like, are we
Mhm.
just going to wait to find out? And, like here in Canada, unfortunately, in this circumstance, we're actually a bit ahead of you guys in that, the Chinese influence is so embedded in our political structure and our national industries that if we were to remove Chinese corruption and foreign influence altogether, it could collapse our economy, right? Like, we have varying we have varying real estate schemes going on right now, both in Vancouver and Toronto, and
Mm.
all 100% completely ran and operated by this organized crime groups tied to the CCP, right? Because the thing that people don't understand is that they all function in one unified body, right? So
Right.
Chinese organized crime operates as an arm of the CCP. And then you have the United Front Work Department, which is also an arm of the CCP. And they all collude and work together. So they're very, very organized. So I guess
Exactly.
the point that I'm trying to get here is that, it's extremely irresponsible. I mean, it's irresponsible isn't even the right word. I mean, I don't even know if there's a word for it. It's insane to just leave your borders open and just let people come in and just do nothing about it. And, now in New York City, I mean, recently you had those two police officers who got their asses kicked by those illegal immigrants. And, I made a joke the other day because like the next day they put out a video of their dance team on some morning show. And I wrote, yeah, this is going to deter illegal immigrants from kicking the shit out of them in the future for sure.
Mhm.
Like, what are you doing? What are you guys doing? Like, it's almost like they're, again, just completely disconnected from reality. Like they have no relation to the real world whatsoever. And so I've kept you for an hour and a half. I want to close with this story of Tiffany Henyard, because it's so, I mean, it kind of encapsulates all of the craziness that we've talked about for the last hour and a
Yeah.
half, but it is even crazier. I didn't know any of this was happening until I read your piece the other day. So would you mind just going into Tiffany Henyard, who she is and what she's been, the chaos that she's unleashed in her wake?
Man, there's so much. This is one of those articles where I struggled because I was like, there's so much here. I didn't know what to put in. Um, Long story short, I would say that she's the mayor of Dalton, Illinois, which is a village of 20,000 people. She's also the supervisor of Thornton Township, which Thornton Township is like an incorporation of different smaller towns into one. So instead of having a mayor, they have a supervisor. So it's kind of like the CEO of the township. And so she's basically the CEO of the township for Thornton Township as well. Um, the biggest issue is that she is siphoning funds for her own pleasure, for her own endeavors. And what makes it different, because I'm in New Jersey, we have corrupt politicians. Like, that's what we do here. It's like, mwah, with corrupt politicians. But she's brazen about it. Like, she's brazen and chauvinistic about it. And it's weird and it's outlandish, and she makes a spectacle of the stuff. She's antagonistic, unnecessarily antagonistic. Um, One of the things that just come out, one, she's being investigated by the FBI, so it's been confirmed. I would have put it in the article, but I couldn't find anything confirming it. But now it's been confirmed through several outlets that the FBI is investigating some of the activities that she's done. She's done a lot of stuff, whether it's been taking public funds to take lavish trips around the country, first class trips to Vegas, New York, and in various other cities, staying in Four Seasons Hotel and other high class hotels for people like herself and her group. Now, it's one thing if you're taking a trip on behalf of, let's say, bringing business to Dalton or something like that, but it doesn't appear for it to be anything related to Dalton itself, and giving some sort of rationality for using public funds. Or actually, it might have been Thornton Township. She was basically siphoning money from both, as her personal piggy bank. She's taken money and pushed it into her. She tries to say it's not her nonprofit, it's someone else's nonprofit, her friend's nonprofit. But either way, like, there are procedures behind stuff like that, like giving money to nonprofits using public funds. She completely skips over it. One of the things I didn't put in the article was, and it's so outrageous to me. She got a Tahoe, GNC Tahoe, right? Now the cost of the Tahoe was, I want to say it was like $93,000, right? So that's just the cost of the Tahoe. The interest rate on top of that was an additional $55,000. And when you buy anything, when you buy stuff like that, there's supposed to be two signatures. One signature, hers, right? And then what happened was when there started becoming more and more scrutiny, she ignores freedom of information requests. The board of trustees for Dalton is locked out of the accounts, so they don't fully know how bad things are. We have the banks where they have leases for like stuff like public vehicles, like police cars, who were saying, we're going to start repossessing these vehicles because we're not receiving payments. They're not paying their bills. Why aren't they paying the bills? It's because they're in a deficit. Before she got into office, they were at a surplus. The last that the Board of Trustees saw when it came to Dalton, I believe it was Dalton, was $7 million deficit. Now, this isn't New York City,
Right.
right? Where
There's
there's tons of
20,000
revenue.
people.
It's
Yeah.
20,000 people.
Yeah.
And you automatically put them in debt. Thornton Township, I think, I might be mixing up the numbers between the two, but it's still a lot. I think it was Thornton Township that was in a deficit of $5 million. And they ultimately took out a loan to cover the loss of the $5 million for now, but they still have to pay that money back, right? So and now the latest thing that's gotten the FBI's attention is that she's intimidating people who within the town who are either political opponents, like if they're associated with board of trustees who are being defiant of her. She's intimidating people who aren't donating to her campaign anymore, right? She's refusing to give stuff like liquor licenses to like bars because they're not playing ball. The police department is in her pocket because she's giving a ton of overtime because she now has like a 4 or 5 man 24/7 detail.
Right.
So to give an idea, the way they broke it down was consistently every year in overtime, the police had about $600,000 paid in overtime. That was about consistent. That was what was normal. It is so far 1.6 million in overtime, right? Because of her details. So the police department's in her pocket because she's funding the hell out of them and giving these guys money. And so the one thing I was just watching not too long ago. So the businesses started speaking up about the ones who were getting intimidated. They
Right.
went publicly on camera with the local news talking about, yes, federal agents came here and talked to me. And I talked about this, and they went to other businesses talking to them. And some of them were bars, right? It was a couple bars who went on the record and was talking to the news. 2 hours later, they do a raid on both of those properties.
Wow. I mean, she's so in your piece that you wrote, you included a photo of her dressed up like Nino Brown from New Jack
Yes.
City. And I'm a kid of the 90s. I've watched New Jack City probably 50 billion times in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, she's basically become Dalton's Nino Brown. I mean, that's what she is now. She's a crime lord, and she has the police in her pocket because of all the extra overtime that she's. I mean, it is the wildest story, right? Because she's basically taken over this small town, and there's nothing anybody can really do about it. And I mean,
and they tried to recall her, and that's another thing. And I can't remember like the technicalities. They attempted a recall. She sued in saying that the recall was unconstitutional, or that's what her lawyers were suing, saying it was unconstitutional. And there were some sort of grounds where the recall effort was unconstitutional, I think based on how they were trying to attempt the recall. It was some sort of legal technicality. However, they did say, we will leave the recall on the ballot, you just can't enforce the recall. So people still voted for the recall, and it was over 50% voted to have her removed. So if the recall did go through, she would be out of office, but there were legal technicalities. So it's not a case of like where everybody is just cool with this. No, there are actual oppositions. She would have been removed from office if the recall went through, but she won. She won that effort. But yeah, this is like
it's so wild, but you know, I mean, we're laughing, but the truth is it is a prime example as to why people need to get involved politically on a local level, because we always think about things in terms of, you know, Trudeau, Polyev here in Canada, or Trump, Biden in the US. But you know, local politics have far more to do with your day-to-day life than federal politics do, right?
Yeah.
And this is why getting involved on a municipal level, on the city, you know what I mean, like on a state or if you're in Canada, provincial level, like this is why you have to be involved, because shit like this does happen. Like this woman has taken over this town, and she's basically running it like Nino Brown. And
Right.
didn't she walk into court with "Bitch Better Have My Money" playing like all over the? She had a
No,
DJ, right?
so it was, yes. So she had that's another thing. There were multiple times she had a DJ, paid for by the
I'm sorry,
taxpayers.
man. That's crazy. It's so
But
crazy.
it was a board meeting. It was a board, like it was the like what you would call like a city council meeting where like the public can
Right,
come. It was
right.
that. The reason why she played "Bitch Better Have My Money," she was telling the taxpayers, "You better pay, right? You better pay your taxes." And she thought it was sufficient for her to play "Bitch Better Have My Money," and she was saying, "Pay me what you owe me," right? Those were her words. So it absolutely wild, um, absolutely crazy. She did $1 million giveaway, but the $1 million giveaway was public funds.
So it's like here's some of your money. At least some of this is probably came from you originally. It's so nuts. So
Right.
I'm getting the light is coming through the window on me now. So Adam, man, thank you so much for this conversation today, dude. It was so enlightening. Can you tell everybody where they can find you, and anybody who wants to learn more about this story? Adam wrote a terrific article in the New York Post about it. Just Google Tiffany Henyard and New York Post and just brace yourself, because it is, I mean, it is terrible for the people who live there, but it is highly entertaining if you don't, and it is fucking insane what our world is coming to. But in the
Yeah.
meantime, Adam, can you tell everybody where they can find you?
Mostly on Substack, adambcoleman.substack.com, or you can get to the same address, adambcoleman.com, and Twitter. That's my main social media app that I talk to the public on the most. But I'm doing the Breaking Bread series. I'm going to be working with a startup media company soon. I'll announce that likely in March, where they're going to be taking on the Breaking Bread series and putting it on places like Roku TV and stuff like that. So encouraging conversations in person, having meals. We didn't really even get to talk about that, but
Yeah, no, so
yeah.
just to interject here, just to interrupt you on your outro, but your Adam has a recent episode of Breaking Bread with Isaiah Carter, and I can't remember the other gentleman's name who was in it.
Jason Anderson.
Jason Anderson. It is a great fucking listen. I was captivated for 2 hours sitting in my car listening to it, so I highly recommend. Anyways, Adam, please continue.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, and I'll say this briefly. The emphasis on doing Breaking Bread was because it was something that I was doing. So like how I met the British conservative, the British conservative in Madrid. I was meeting people. I was bouncing around Europe and meeting people from all over the place. I remember having political discussions with an Australian woman in Barcelona. You name it. I was meeting different people, and we were talking culture and politics, and we were having a meal, and it was always cordial. Um, and it's that kind of thing that I wanted to bring, where I'm talking to different people. Like, for example, a lot of people don't even know Isaiah is a Democrat,
Mm,
right?
yeah.
And so is Jason.
Mhm.
Jason is a Democrat as well. And you wouldn't know because there's overlap. There's things that they don't like, and we're talking about it, and we're having these discussions.
Mhm.
So the next episode that's coming out, I'm literally sitting down with a Democrat strategist who's based in Washington, D.C. She invited me into her home, and we had a nice, cordial conversation, even though she knows that I am not a Democrat.
Mm.
And I genuinely like her. I think she's a good person. I don't agree with all of her positions, but there are positions that, like, I didn't sit there saying I disagree. I don't think one time when we talked for about an hour and a half, and it's because there are areas of overlap. There are things that we can come together on, and we can have like a really good conversation. It's extremely casual. I'll tell you this. I think the best episode I filmed so far was with Chloe Cole, who's the detransitioner,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a very personal, very like intimate conversation. We're sitting on the couch. We had some sushi, and we're just chit chatting.
Mm-hmm.
And that one should be coming out in like 3 weeks or so. I want to say about 3 weeks, but even for her, she was like, at one point, she's like, "How long have we been recording for?" I'm like, "Oh, like hour and 20." She's like, "I thought we've been talking for 30 minutes,"
Yeah.
because it's so casual, and we're just talking, and I'm not interviewing her. She says what she's thinking, and I say what I'm thinking, and just like any conversation, I interject or I say something and we laugh, even though
Mm.
it's kind of serious, and then
Yeah.
it's that kind of thing. And I think there's extreme value in doing it in person, and I've been very fortunate to travel to different places. Like we filmed in Nashville. We just happened to be at the same place at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a lot different. Like I'm enjoying our conversation, but it would feel different if we
Oh,
were
for sure.
in front of each other.
Yeah.
And I think that type of thing comes through on camera,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because when you have a dialogue with someone in person, you're not trying to fight them,
Yeah.
right? And it becomes doubly when they invite you into their home.
Yeah.
Like you're not trying to fight somebody who
It's
you're
a very
they
it's a very
it's personal,
disarming. Yeah. Yeah. For
right?
sure. Yeah.
And then the food is very disarming. It's comforting, and you're just chill. And we don't censor. We're just saying whatever comes to mind. Like, is that how
Yeah.
you feel? And we're just talking.
Yeah.
And I want to bring more of that. So I'm this weekend I'm heading to DC to film a couple in the DC area. Um, I've been very fortunate to film a couple in London, to do a more international. Um, and I want to go to more places, and hopefully with this new company, I'll get some more funding to do a little bit more traveling.
Mm.
But and also, last thing I'll say is I want to talk to a lot of different interesting people. Some of them are public figures. Some of them are semi-public. Maybe they're just moms.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just regular people. They have a viewpoint. And they just want to be heard. So I'm trying to, I don't want to say bridge the gap, but I'm just trying to have nice, cordial conversations that are interesting, and they're very casual.
Yeah, man. I've been listening to it. Like I said, I listened to the other episode the other day in my car. I read the piece that you wrote in retrospect of your conversation with Chloe Cole, which I found was incredibly illuminating, because we could have talked for 2 hours about that, about how the
Yeah.
experts have failed on all levels. But I just think what you're doing is so great, man. And I love your approach. It's unfortunate that we have reached this time in our society where we can't talk to each other anymore about
Yeah.
anything unless we agree on everything. We can't talk about anything, and it sucks, because it's like, how are we ever going to get over a lot of the shit that we're dealing with? And how are we going to find solutions to these problems? We can't find solutions without discourse. There's just no way. And
Yeah.
so I appreciate so much what you're doing, man. I'm a fan. I'm a listener.
Thank
I'm
you.
a reader. And it was an honor to talk to you for almost 2 hours, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was a pleasure.